think it reinforced the research that I did on my book that Jeffrey Epstein has always viewed himself as smarter than everybody else, and he also has collected people all along the way, particularly over the 2 decades through his trafficking. And that was always to get secrets and bits of information about individuals that he could pass to other people he trafficked in.
In this fictional storyline, the newly unsealed Jeffrey Epstein emails do more than brush against the Harvey brand. They pull Marjorie Harvey's name into the same murky ecosystem that has already entangled presidents, princes, and powerful intermediaries. And this happens at the very moment her marriage to Steve Harvey is portrayed as straining under the pressure of a massive, high-stakes financial split. What we see in late 2025 is a collision of 3 forces: a disgraced financier's inbox becoming public, a television empire built on relationship commentary, and a wife who insiders in this fictional world claim may be preparing to testify about what she witnessed, what she agreed to, and what she was pressured into during the years Steve's career accelerated the fastest. When House committees released more than 20,000 pages of Epstein correspondence in November 2025, the spotlight immediately hit the messages involving Trump and the White House. But behind those headlines, entertainment attorneys say there were references that caused quiet concern within the fictionalized Harvey household in Atlanta.
In the emails, it is quite clear that Jeffrey Epstein had a wide, almost incalculably wide circle of associates. People who were celebrities, people who were either in foreign governments or leaders of foreign governments, business tycoons, and the like.
It's important to state clearly within this fictional scenario, the emails are not a clean client list. Lawmakers from both parties admit the archive release that fall is messy, incomplete, and being used politically. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee released a curated batch in mid-November 2025, emphasizing Epstein calling Trump a borderline insane and implying the former president knew more than he claimed. Republicans countered hours later with more than 20,000 pages they said would correct that framing and expose selective leaks. Inside that larger document dump, according to legal sources familiar with fictional divorce preparations, are 2011 exchanges between Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, whose phrasing timestamps high, and redactions have been quietly flagged in internal memos by attorneys handling other high-profile marital disputes, including the Harveys. Those attorneys are not speaking publicly, but they are the ones suggesting there is a name, or something close to a name, that resembles Marjorie's resurfacing later in sealed family court materials.
Interview is and never was part of the Epstein files. She was sentenced in 2025. This was an interview by Trump's lawyer to protect Trump from the fallout about the Epstein files. What this really is nothing but a sketchy PR stunt by the Department of Justice. And we have seen this movie before. The Maxwell interview is to the Epstein files what the Barr letter was to the Mueller investigation.
Looking back at April 2011 in this fictional account, Epstein was already a convict. Misspelled emails with Maxwell, messages that experts now say reveal a level of arrogance suggesting he never imagined they would one day be read aloud in congressional hearings. One partially redacted email refers to a woman spending hours at his residence with a future president, while Maxwell responds with a tone linguists have described as coded compliance rather than surprise. On the surface, nothing in that exchange points to the Harvey family. What has raised quiet questions in 2025, however, is that the same email chain, its header, metadata, or timestamp appears to resemble items mirrored in discovery requests filed by attorneys handling a major entertainment divorce. Those attorneys do not name names, but their description of a Southern socialite who later reinvented herself as half of a motivational power couple has led many observers to draw their own conclusions. Fast forward to January 2019, when Epstein, still alive, emailed journalist Michael Wolff about Trump's first term, complaining about fixers flipping, disclosures tightening, and claiming that Trump knew about the girls. Another message from that same year references Maxwell being asked to avoid certain phrasing, a detail Democrats highlighted in November 2025 as evidence of prior awareness before Republicans released additional context. Publicly, the argument is a Washington fight about narrative control. Inside the fictional Harvey split, legal insiders claim these same estate records are being sought not to relitigate Epstein, but to outline a broader pattern of powerful men relying on hush arrangements, private aviation, and unwritten understandings to manage reputational fallout from their private encounters.
Now, I'm a Christian, but I ain't that good a Christian.
While all of this played out in sealed filings and committee rooms, Steve Harvey remained on stages and screens throughout 2023 and 2024, presenting himself as a redeemed husband and a voice of relationship wisdom. Watson. He was the man who had weathered mistakes, survived 2 divorces, and found stability in a 3rd marriage he described as unshakable. In August 2023, as online rumors circulated that Marjorie had grown close to a bodyguard and a private chef and was allegedly positioning herself for a $200 million settlement, Steve addressed a packed business festival in Atlanta, dismissing the chatter as foolishness and insisting their marriage was solid. Around the same time, Marjorie posted a link to a religious blog titled How to Handle Being Lied About, presenting herself as a target of cruelty rather than a cause of turmoil. Publicly, the message was unity, faith, and family strength. Privately, according to individuals familiar with the situation, lawyers on both sides had already begun assembling digital paper trails that could become bargaining chips if the marriage unraveled. That is where the fictional link to Epstein's inbox shifts from conspiracy theory territory to legal strategy. Sources familiar with the negotiations say Marjorie's team has quietly examined whether records from Epstein's estate, now in the hands of Congress and federal agencies, overlap with trips, events, or social networks she intersected with before and after marrying Steve in 2007. This is a woman whose first husband, Jim Townsend, was sentenced to life in the 1990s for attempting to purchase large quantities of illicit substances before being pardoned decades later, and whose second husband, Donald Woods, was reportedly involved in smuggling operations. Townsend has publicly claimed in past disclosures that investigators once had enough evidence to pressure Marjorie, and that his own plea deal helped keep her name out of federal indictments. Now, in 2025, attorneys are asking whether the same systems that preserved Epstein's estate records might also contain remnants of earlier investigations related to those past marriages, and what that means for how Marjorie is viewed in this fictional narrative, as someone manipulated by the men around her, an active participant, or something far more complicated.
He took my Winton from me. He turned my son against me.
For Steve, the stakes stretch far beyond properties, payouts, or residual checks from syndicated game shows. His entire modern persona rests on preaching loyalty, discernment, and what men should understand about commitment across best-selling relationship books, motivational tours, and talk show monologues. Years ago, when his ex-wife Mary Shackelford accused him of infidelity, emotional harm, and more, she followed with a $60 million lawsuit alleging a soul destruction and a list of purported civil rights violations. A Los Angeles judge dismissed the case and sent it back to Texas, and Steve's legal team dismissed the claims as frivolous and entirely false. That ruling allowed him to cast Mary as resentful and himself as vindicated. But if Marjorie now enters a courtroom armed with references to Epstein's emails and alleged efforts to keep portions of her potential testimony sealed, the optics shift. Suddenly, the man who mocked rumor culture on the InvestFest stage begins to look, at minimum, like someone determined to keep the most volatile fragments of his private life away from public scrutiny. That is why industry insiders say whispers are circulating about subpoenas aimed directly at Epstein's estate. Specifically, any overlapping travel logs, guest lists, or sealed correspondence that might place familiar personalities in uncomfortable settings. They emphasize that an email header is not evidence of wrongdoing, and that being copied on a message is not proof of involvement. But they also acknowledge that in the court of public opinion, context is everything. A socialite whose first two husbands were connected to large-scale substance operations, whose daughter later moved in the same luxury circles as a music mogul now serving a federal sentence for coercive private encounters, and whose current husband once met with Trump at Trump Tower and faced backlash for it, does not receive the benefit of the doubt when Epstein's name surfaces anywhere near hers. So,
you got to understand, she's not going to be speaking on none of that because her whole thing is to hide her past.
And if, as sources allege, Steve's team has been fighting behind closed doors to prevent Marjorie from giving a full deposition that might touch any of this, Then what happened on November 12, 2025 takes on a far darker meaning than a simple website refresh. This divorce is not about affection. It's about leverage. And once Marjorie's attorneys began peeling back financial layers, they reportedly discovered something Steve never wanted exposed: a pattern of money moves, legal risks, and quiet cleanups that look very different when every line item is treated as a bargaining chip instead of a blessing. Steve has been through courtroom battles before. In 2017, Mary Shackelford filed her civil claim, accusing him of destroying her life and seeking more than $60 million, using that infamous phrase about her assault to describe what she believes she endured during and after their split. Although a judge dismissed the case, the filing outlined pages of allegations involving emotional damage, financial upheaval, and a former spouse claiming she was erased from the empire she helped build. For years, Steve framed it as a nuisance suit from a bitter ex. Now, with Marjorie allegedly pursuing more than $200 million, that old figure no longer looks like a fluke. It looks like a warning he narrowly escaped. Insiders note that Steve's finances have not always aligned with his motivational messaging. In 2024, entertainment accountants began quietly discussing sudden liquidations and discrete transfers. Properties moved into trust, production interests reshuffled, revenue streams routed through new entities with unfamiliar names. On paper, these maneuvers can be part of smart retirement planning. But when a spouse's legal team starts examining those same documents, every sale, refinance, or restructuring can be reframed as evidence that someone anticipated a storm and began shifting assets to safer ground before the first legal strike hit. So why would a woman publicly loyal for nearly 20 years suddenly demand what insiders describe as half of a near billion-dollar fortune? People close to the situation insist it is not just about money. It is about protection. The word they keep repeating is insurance.
She used to hate, see, that's what I'm saying. I'm gonna tell it all. I'm telling all y'all. She said, and it was fact, she used to check dudes with big lips.
Not insurance, as in a policy you buy from a company, but insurance in human form. The more Marjorie knows, the more she has allegedly tolerated, the higher the price of her silence becomes. If even a fraction of the whispers about sealed dockets, estate subpoenas, or long-buried investigations are true, then Marjorie isn't simply asking to walk away comfortably. She is, according to one industry veteran, calculating the cost of making sure certain questions never get answered under oath. And that is where Lori Harvey enters the picture, not as a villain, but as the unpredictable variable in a family that can no longer control its own narrative, home. In 2019, the same year Epstein was sending emails referencing young women in his environments and hinting that powerful men knew more than they admitted, Lori was being photographed across cities with Sean Aditi Combs. From Manhattan sidewalks and coordinated outfits to sun-drenched lunches in Italy, with Steve and Marjorie seated at the same table, to lavish getaways in Mexico, the images told a story the family never confirmed, yet never fully escaped either.
Her mother is 54 years old. Her mother is 5 years older.
A rising model stepdaughter, a legendary music figure decades older, and parents who, at least in those photos, appeared comfortable enough to dine, travel, and smile through it. Fast forward to 2024, when federal agents raided multiple properties, seized hard drives, and began revealing a storm of allegations involving high-end freak-offs, coercive encounters, paid companions, and controlled substances inside Diddy's world. Court filings and investigative reports described a secret ecosystem built on power imbalances, cash, and tightly guarded access. As rumor sites and several legal bloggers began whispering that Lori's name had surfaced in at least one sealed affidavit connected to financial settlements or guest lists from that orbit, the story stopped being a glamorous Hollywood romance. Suddenly, those polished 2019 vacation photos looked less like carefree summer fun and more like potential exhibits in a much darker investigation.
Just remember that you're the prize at all times.
Boom.
Best advice.
The question investigators, bloggers, and armchair analysts keep circling is blunt. Was Lori simply an on-again, off-again companion during those years? Or was she, knowingly or not, part of a wider ecosystem her mother had witnessed from the inside long before? Steve legally adopted Lori in 2007, the same year Epstein's first criminal case sent shockwaves through elite social circles and forced many wealthy men to reconsider where they traveled and who they were photographed with. Bringing Lori into the Harvey name provided her status, stability, and a famous last name. But now, as Epstein's archives are dissected and Dee Dee's past is being pulled apart in court, some insiders quietly ask whether Steve adopted a daughter or a long-term liability that lawyers can now weaponize. And when you connect all this to the political world, the pattern becomes even more unsettling. In 2019, Epstein was emailing journalist Michael Wolff and others, complaining about a former president he claimed knew about the girls, calling him unstable, and dropping hints about shared associates and shared secrets. During that same period, in the canyons of New York real estate, Steve Harvey was photographed walking into Trump Tower for a meeting with the newly elected president. He defended it as civic duty, saying both Obama's team and Trump's transition staff encouraged the meeting to discuss inner-city housing. He walked out of that tower praising Trump's openness and optimism about potential collaboration, even as parts of his own audience turned on him immediately. Now look at the timing.
Her, doesn't it? She probably wants to get out early. So I think that we have more digging to do. I think the DOJ transparency effort here is the right thing, but the reason it's on a Friday, Will, is I think there are no smoking guns. There's other places we have to look.
Well, Buck, you appropriately...
Epstein's estate materials, including those 2019 messages about girls and Trump's supposed awareness, are pouring into congressional servers in late 2025, just as House Republicans release over 20,000 pages in a political brawl over who enabled what. Steve Harvey's controversial Trump Tower meeting sits frozen in the public record from January 2017, complete with sound bites and photos beamed globally. Wedged between those two timelines is a third, a long-simmering marital breakdown that insiders say reached filing stage just as the Epstein documents went public. 3 storylines, 3 reputations, 1 theme: powerful men who thought their private dealings would never see the light. Commentators put it bluntly: 3 men built empires on secrets. Epstein weaponized silence clauses and hush agreements until the system closed in on him. Trump has faced accusations, settlements, and trials while maintaining his deal-maker image. Steve Harvey turned marital missteps into a wisdom brand, selling books and tours decoding male behavior and relationship strategies. 2 of the 3 men are still standing. The third figure is not a man but a woman who sources say is preparing to speak under oath, where every word is recorded and punishable if false. That is why the phrase "a financial war" barely captures what is unfolding. If Marjorie's legal team has cross-sections of Epstein estate material, Dee Dee-related filings, and federal case references from her prior marriages, the rumored $200 million starts to look like the price of silence spanning multiple eras of scandal.
So I just keep going through. But then I tell you something too, haters motivate me. Because when they talking about me, that means I'm doing something.
It is not just one marriage at stake. It is an entire mythology. The myth of the self-made family man who turned chaos into clarity, the myth of a blended clan that rose above street histories and industry whispers, the myth of a household that, despite drama, was safe, controlled, and guided by a man who knew what he was doing. Yet in this moment, Marjorie holds the real leverage. Legal insiders say the most chilling detail in the filings is not property counts, syndicated game show valuations, or retroactive touring income accounting. It is a single line about anticipated testimony and third-party records, a polite legal hint that if demands are unmet, certain stories could be told in a forum Steve has long avoided. A courtroom where cameras may not roll but transcripts eventually leak. Where does that leave us? Foes. Watching as a polished empire flickers, observing a woman who stayed mostly silent for years while her husband spoke for a living, re-examining Lori Harvey's glamorous jet-set years and wondering whether those vacations were just holidays or chapters in a larger script her parents never fully controlled, replaying images of Steve shaking hands at Trump Tower and considering how many overlapping guest lists, donors, and private flight manifests sit in archives investigators are only now mapping. The line that should make everyone in the story sit up. Marjorie Harvey did not just file for divorce. She filed a subpoena. The moment that testimony goes public, Steve Harvey risks losing more than his marriage. He risks losing the one thing he spent 20 years selling, the illusion that he was ever in control. For real. What happens when a woman who has watched decades of moguls, politicians, and entertainers' secrets decides her silence is no longer for sale?